It is December 8th, 2019. You're listening to Fancy Ramen, episode 140. Today, we talk about Knives Out, the hit 2019 film.
We talk a little bit about Neil's play of Vandal Hearts and Vanguard Bandits, two classics that he thinks are the pinnacle of gaming in their time.
Scott gives us his impression so far of God of War. And we talk a little bit about Katana Zero, or maybe more of a preview of what's to come with Katana Zero next week.
All that and more on episode 140 of Fancy Ramen. Are you making sure to record so we can get those mouth sounds?
I am. Actually, you know what? I've never really tried to see. I mean, I know you can probably hear this.
Oh, yeah, I can hear it. It sounds good.
And so now we're going to take a bite. I'm eating a Ritz cracker by your ears.
Unfortunately, this is not too far off, I guess, from the ASMR quality. I've got those tingles.
Are you aware of like how explicit some of these ASMR videos get?
Oh yes, absolutely. My my old roommate and very, very good friend of mine used to work he used to work for a company as a video editor. And when you have that downtime of just stuff that is like buffering or processing for long periods of time, you're working on other work. And so he also has background in like animation and design of that sort. And so he'd be doing that and he'd listen to ASMR videos while that was going on. And he'd get on the ASMR, just like channel loop where it would just put you through like next video, next video, next video. Oh yeah. And so I think there was one or two instances in which his headset would like get unplugged or something, and so it auto switched to the speakers, and then you just hear like girlfriend ASMR of like, "Hey baby, hi, how are you, baby? What's going on? I've missed you." And yeah, he just
and we think other countries
I think he was
weird.
Very embarrassed. Yeah, no, we're super fucking weird. Everybody's weird.
But this is Fancy Ramen, as the intro has already at this point in time been played. Cookie is out because he is...
I think it's family brunch. He's reuniting with his kin.
It's been 20 years since he's last met with them. This is a very touching, emotional moment.
If there's any facts or information that would contradict that in our audio files, please ignore that. That's a mistake. We've obviously... made some errors in construing that information. It is true. Cookie has never actually laid eyes on his family before, and this is a very special moment for him.
So while he's having his reunion now, have you done anything noteworthy this week?
The most noteworthy thing I've done this week is actually something, if I remember correctly, Cookie did last week, which was see the movie Knives Out. I went and finally caught that flick last night with Sierra, and it's one of the most entertaining and hardest to follow whodunits I think I've seen in quite a while. I think I mentioned before I went to see it, I was hoping it was going to be a modern Clue, and in a way it sort of is. There's a lot of things that make Clue, the movie Clue from like, I think early 2000s, 1990s. I'm going to go ahead and give that 20-year block to make sure I definitely get the date right within there. But Clue obviously was a little bit more of a cult classic, and it was very rigid in where it took its source materials from. Knives Out is this very fun and interesting whodunit about I think it's like a multi-millionaire murder mystery writer who ends up dead on the night or in the like late hours of his 85th birthday, and his whole family is there. And within the first like 10-15 minutes, you get exposed to the fact that pretty much every person in this man's family is an absolute scumbag who is just like leeching off of his wealth. And so the rest of the film is trying to figure out well, who killed him? How, like, what would motivate these, that like they all have a weak, or I think a pretty standard like movie style motivation, where he's like cutting each one of them out from the money, or like revealing a big secret of theirs that could destabilize their relationship. He's essentially like stirring the pot and starting a bunch of shit, because he's not literally described, but there is a line in the movie that essentially characterizes the main character, or not the main character, but the murdered character as a messy bitch. And so very entertaining. We get to see in media res, like, I think it's post the murder is when the movie starts, and then we get introduced to the characters sequence by sequence, and it moves through these different segments of the film that are really interesting. Like, you have an interrogation scene, like flitting back and forth of the interrogations occurring for a couple key characters in the start, and then there becomes the actual like investigation narrative around the house, and then it builds into like the potential culprit or killer might be on the loose, and the like tracking down and discovery of that person. All while there's a very, very interesting, I don't even want to say B plot, but essentially there are kind of two perspectives that are existing throughout the movie. One of a like close confidant and friend, even of the murdered. Why don't I just say victim, of the victim, who is his home nurse, and like what she knows and her following of the investigation, and then of Daniel Craig's character, this like Southern accented, I guess, Detective Poirot, so to speak, where he's a very like talented investigator who's been hired to like figure out the case, because the FBI or the police or whoever is doing the investigation is not exactly willing to pursue the case as anything more than a suicide at the end of the night. And so it's a pretty good film. It's very interesting. It's one of my it's one of those films that I enjoyed because it's just a delight to try and guess what's happening next, and it's a little tricky to do. And even if you do like pick up on maybe some of the hints that exist within the film, the final conclusion, like, you're still just kind of giddy to see how it all plays out. Even if you've I think like pegged what are most likely the key elements or details that have occurred with the information you're provided. Very fun. The cast is phenomenal. Like, everybody plays a very, very good and like partitioned role as a different type of wealthy scumbag. You have the like Gwyneth Paltrow goop like stepsister of the family, who was married to one of the victims' like children, who died ages ago and has just been kind of like leeching off of the family's generosity for ages. And her daughter, you have I believe it's Wes, or I can't remember the names. I'm not going to worry about the names in this. I think you have the youngest child who was given a position like managing the publishing of the victim's books. And so he essentially gets like the family business, makes a bunch of money. He has a shithead kid who is described as like an alt-right Nazi troll, who is the guy who plays, he plays Bill in It, at least at part 1. He makes a good like little appearance in the movie, and his wife, I guess his wife doesn't make much of an appearance, but they have their own issues. He's essentially being like he's criticized by the rest of the family for not having made his own fortune or done any of his own work, essentially just inheriting a position and the like money and power that is associated with it. And then I think it's Jamie Lee Curtis. Yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis plays like the eldest child and the daughter who is like self-made, and she's a real hard ass. And so she's just like a very intense and I think sort of mean, self-centered and absorbed person. And her like shitty country club husband, like they all have varied reasons as for why the audience most likely will dislike them as characters, but they do such a good job committing to it and like really going to the extremes of those character archetypes, which is very fun. What is it? Chris Pine? Who's the guy who plays Captain America? Captain America's in this. It's not Chris Pine. It's Chris Evans. It's Chris Evans. Chris Evans plays the grandson who is like, he's described as being very similar to the victim, like a younger version. And he is the like playboy, bad boy, has never had a job in his life, is just like hated by literally every other person in the family. And also is a very messy bitch, like his granddad who passes away. So they have just a really fun cast. The detectives make a fair amount of color to the like entertainment as well. There's one detective who's I think he's the minor detective or the assistant to Lakeith Stanfield's character who's overseeing the investigation. And he's a big like mystery novel nerd essentially, so the whole time throughout the movie his eyes are just lighting up. He's like, oh, this part of the architecture came from this book which inspired like these 3 follow-up novels. And so he's like a tourist around the home just getting excited and giddy about the whole thing. It's a very fun and kind of bizarre movie overall, but it's able to blend the comedic and the like tense mystery elements well enough.
So without getting into spoilers, do you think the movie's conclusion is satisfying in a way that you have seen Clue before, right? And all the different endings and so forth.
Yeah, and Clue has 3 endings. And there's actually a scene in this movie that happens, I guess, relatively early. It's hard to gauge time with the film, but there's like a coin flip that the camera zooms in on for a second. And I could have sworn watching it at that moment in time, I was like, is it depending on how the coin flips? Like, are we going to get a multiple ending option here? Like coin flip heads and we're going to get one outcome, and coin flip tails, we get another. But as far as I know, that didn't happen. There was just a weird amount of focus on it for it not being a key element.
Well, so when I watched Clue years back, and other times I've watched it since then, have been points at which like my experience with mystery and fiction and whodunits in general have been relatively low. Like, so since then, after digesting a bunch of mystery fiction and murder mysteries and so forth, like the only complaint I have about Clue is that there is no way to actually know, as an audience member,
as a
viewer, to figure out who did the act or multiple acts. And that's because Clue was made to have, and I know this doesn't necessarily apply to Knives Out at this point, but the reason for Clue's case is because they had to have multiple endings that could be true. So there are just points where you could actually not be able to reason out all of the clues that the movie gives you before the grand
because
reveal.
It needs a blind spot.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I know that that there's not necessarily a need for that in Knives. But my question is, without getting into spoiler detail, because this definitely looks like something I want to watch.
You really should see it. Yeah, it's a general recommendation, I think.
Is the ending, I guess it's a 2-part question. Is the ending one that you could feasibly figure out on your own, even if you had to like watch it a second time, and do all the clues actually point to one person or one solution, one true canonical solution? And two, or part B, is the ending satisfying?
Okay. Arguably, you could solve this film. I think there's maybe a small room for argument that the film is just I don't know, it's just opaque enough in certain spots where you can't definitively take the clues and information and say there's no other way it works out differently from this. There is just it is the most red herring laden film I've ever seen in my entire life. And that's what makes it such a delight I went into this movie determined to solve it, and I watched it with the amount of I guess intellectual intensity that I had available at the time. Just like every single bit of my attention was locked in on the film, which made it also film was very, very good considering the fact that I am trying to just pull it apart the whole time I'm watching it. And there are so many moments where there were things that drew my attention that probably that I should not have had my attention drawn to, that worked for the filmmakers as a red herring for the audience. As well as there were clues and hints that slipped right under my nose because they were doing such a good job pulling my attention to other things. I think it is entirely solvable. I just think it would definitely be one of those films where I don't know how you see it. I don't know how you see it the first time and you piece it together. Or you can make, I think you can make a lucky guess. If we're talking about a worksheet where it's okay, who did it and what was the outcome? I think there's a fair amount of people who could make a lucky guess, but showing your work would be super, super difficult, not impossible. For satisfaction, I think that lends to the satisfaction of the film is the whole time, no matter how close you've been paying attention or how, I don't know, confident you feel in your expectation of the ending. I have a feeling that the ending is going to catch most everyone for a loop, but they're not going to feel super cheated by it. It's not, it's definitely not a film where, and this is not spoiling anything because there is not a butler, but it's not a film where the butler doesn't show up for the whole film. And then at the end of the film, a bloody glove of the butler's is found. They're oh, is the butler the whole time? And he's gotten 3 seconds of screen time and one dialogue line. And that's your tea, sir. And so it's the exposure to the culprit, so to speak, or to the killer is substantial enough that you get a lot of time to read the evidence and the situation and all of the characters and make a determination. I just don't think it's a very easy ask for someone to put it together. And that's what made it satisfying for me, is that I thought I had done a great job and I had done a pretty good job, but I was not able to piece together exactly what was going to happen by the end of the film. And I felt really okay with that by the end. I guess I can speak for the people in my theater. The place that I went to see it at, I go to relatively frequently for the big blockbuster movies, anything that's not an indie film or a limited release. I normally end up going to this AMC in town, and it's I think the more traveled one within the city. And audiences almost never stick around for shit. They're just immediately out as soon as the credits roll. This is a movie that has, as far as I know, no hidden scenes or secrets or anything after the credits. And a ton of people just stuck around, I think, to just kind of sit and wallow or bask in the outcome for a second. It was one of those movies that you don't immediately finish and just stroll right out of. You instead like sit there and you go, huh. And that I think that speaks to the quality of it as well. There aren't bad movies that people go to and then they stick around. I can't think of any movie I've seen that's been really terrible and I've thought, wow, I need to like get my feet underneath me for a second. Normally, I think, and is the case for most people, you just want to get the hell out of there as soon as possible if it's a bad film, or if it's mediocre and you don't feel anything. So I see how it's earned its like star reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and whatnot. I understand why it's sort of a cultural moment right now to go see the movie.
Well, I'll have to check it out. Maybe that's what I'll do later today. We'll see.
It's a fun time. Like, that's the other thing. It's not a big investment. It moves by pretty quickly too. Like, I would say on the pacing, there was actually, when the film was wrapping up, I was surprised it was wrapping up at the time.
Like it was starting to go fast, or time had passed by so fast that you were enjoying the movie so much that you hadn't realized that the hour 30 or 2 hour limit was closely approaching.
I don't actually know what the duration of the film was. I just remember getting to a point where it was in the middle of a particular part, in the middle of a plot line that I thought was going to take more time to resolve. And then it sort of resolved and it was just like pedal to the metal. Everything was wrapping up immediately and it really caught me off guard and off balance. And so I don't know. It could be a critique if I thought about it longer, but at least for now I will say, like, the movie does not feel arduous to watch, which even some good films can at times. So it definitely feels like a pretty quick and lean experience.
You're only saying good things so far. The big thing about you saying that the solution is not determined by something, or the solution does not involve something that you've only seen for a brief second either. That's a very good indication of well-written mystery. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I think it was Sherlock Holmes author Sir Arthur Boyle.
Sir Conan Doyle.
Sir Conan Boyle. Arthur Boyle is his rival writer.
His ugly nephew.
So I believe it was him that stated that you should be introduced to the culprit within the first chapter or couple chapters, depending on how significant a chapter is to your story. I
guess you could say that's pretty easy with a film that brings everybody together.
Yeah,
at the very start.
But that absolutely crosses, I think, every form of media, be it movies, books, video games, and so forth.
Having a looming antagonist only works if you have multiple. I'm trying to think. I think having a looming antagonist really only works if you either have an extremely long slog that makes you really appreciate the reveal and part of their identity being withheld or obscured, or even just their accessibility being pulled back. That's a difficult road to walk. I do think it's much more interesting in games and media when you almost immediately know, this fucking guy, this is who I've got to deal with.
Or you would at least get introduced to the idea of that person.
Of them, yes.
So JoJo Part 3 was the first JoJo I read, and I was exposed to, I guess, because of the OVAs and then the video game, and then I read Part 3's manga first.
That's weird.
And Dio Brando is introduced in that in a suiting way, because had you not read Part 1 first, you wouldn't know who this character is. But they immediately introduced the character as being someone that Jotaro's great grandfather, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, great grandfather.
Skips every generation.
A villain in his lifetime, and that now he's back and he's a vampire. It's that Part 3 in that at that point in the story is very primitive in its storytelling, but even that has the basics down, that you need to bring the villain into play before you could actually have any conflicts. You have to have some sort of idea or vision of an antagonistic force. And sometimes it's not always a villain or a person per se, but it's much easier to identify with a story if it is something you can name. Which, in contrast, is partly why, like, I think Valkyria Chronicles sort of fell off my radar pretty fast, because the idea was that the main villain in that game is the war. And
it's so amorphous.
Yeah, it's very obscure, obtuse. And when you have games that are built around survival, it doesn't matter as much. Like, if you think about Fallout Shelter or something, because you're not... that's a really bad example, but it's not something that you are playing for the narrative so much. It's more the mechanic itself that's entertaining. I kind of went on a tangent there because I've been struggling to find a story in a game recently that's really grabbed me, as well as the Somnium Files has. So, singular, it's one game. But if you like those whodunit kind of stories, I just bought... Why I bring that up is I bought 2 copies of the Somnium Files for Switch. And
one for Tiff, one for you?
Nah, well, we only have one Switch anyways, and probably that'll continue that way because we... until, I should say, another Switch model comes out that actually would, bestow stronger processing power or some benefit that we would want, right? But
don't let Sierra and her brand new Nintendo Switch Lite hear you.
Well, I mean, the light is absolutely fine. It's just like that might work for Tiff, but it would never work for me because I only play it docked.
And I think it's like the ultimate just Game Boy replacement is what I'm seeing it do.
The ultimate Vita replacement.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's true. It's just a big yellow Vita.
But I got these 2 games because they were going for half price, as a lot of other Switch games are going for right now with all these sales and deals that are not first party, mind you. Because I knew I was going to get 1 copy for my old roommate Daniel, since I got him to play the demo and he was already in love with like the kooky weirdness of that game. And the second copy, I hadn't decided who to give it to yet. I'm getting my brother a Switch for Christmas for him and his family. And I was thinking about giving it to them, but I don't know if they necessarily would. I don't know if he personally would ever play it. It's like a 30 to 40 hour long game. Lots of whodunit in it, so to speak. And it's a visual novel at that matter. Like, there is some playable parts, but for the most part, you're going through voiceover and kooky jokes about anime.
And that many hours of dialogue.
Yeah, but if I don't know, maybe I should send it to you, Scott, because I think you might like it.
I could play it. I would be willing to try it out, and now is as good a time as any to pick up a new game.
You should try the demo at some point if you have the time, and if you like that, I'll send you that copy.
Okay.
But yeah. Did you do anything else this week before I derailed it into that long conversation?
No. Let's hop right into video games or what you did this week. If
I don't have anything of note I really want to bring up. And video game wise, I can be real quick because I haven't really had a whole lot of time to play anything that I haven't already played. But this morning I did do sort of like a variety stream where I just picked up a couple old games that I hadn't played in years. Real quickly, since they kind of apply to like more recent games we've played, that one being Fire Emblem Three Houses, which, aside from the game being kind of easy at times, I feel like this might be one of the easier Fire Emblems.
You think so?
Yeah, I do think so. Maybe not if you put it on like the added hardest difficulty, but like the only problem you really face, I feel like, in that game is how you want to destroy the Death Knight, which is all about calculated risk and then rewinding when someone gets killed. What's up?
So damn hard. He's so damn hard. Well, yeah, I mean,
and it's
mode.
Just from like a statistics or a stat standpoint. Like, his base stats are so high when you first encounter him. You have to basically just throw all of your units at him, like your And when I mean units, I don't mean your characters, but the I don't remember the name of it. The battalions, because those you don't get countered from.
Yeah.
So you throw battalions at it until you get them just low enough that your main character can fucking,
Right, because anyone in one-on-one combat with the Death Knight is almost an instant kill.
Yeah. So let's put those aside,
lucky.
and let's put the monsters aside, because the monsters aren't necessarily that difficult either, as long as you have the battalion strength for them, right?
Okay. I was going to argue that the monsters without battalions are incredibly easy on the regular difficulty, and in some situations very difficult on hard. I would say, for instance, oh my goodness, why can't I think it's Miriam, right? Miriam has the blue hair in that game. She's the haunted one.
Yes.
Yeah. Her quest where you're in fog of war and there's monsters literally everywhere is so damn hard on hard mode if not everyone has a battalion.
And that's what the solution is, right? You just have everyone with a battalion.
It feels so lame, though. I don't like it. I guess maybe I think the game's harder because I'm not willing to really completely invest in the mechanic of battalions.
I mean, that's the thing. I hardly invest in it either. It's just like I look at the AoE effect because that's the only thing that matters to me.
Yeah.
And see how high I need to get their leadership or is that what it is?
Yeah, I think
Charisma?
it's leadership. Yeah, it's leadership. And charisma is the stat, I think, that increases damage and hit rate or whatever with it. I think it's damage.
But overall, you would say that Firehouse's
3 emblems.
Fire Emblem Three Houses is like a well designed game in terms of like the AI and so forth. The AI doesn't. It just follows all the trademarks of like a tactical, turn-based, tile-based RPG or whatever, and a Japanese SRPG, or turn-based RPG, turn-based strategy RPG rather. I picked up 2 older ones on stream today. One was called Vandal Hearts, and the other one's called Vanguard Bandits. I think I might have talked about Vanguard Bandits at some point,
I think I've heard of Vandal Hearts.
Vandal Hearts is a classic, but playing it now for the first time since I played it on a PlayStation 1, way back in the day, kind of reminded me just how many things have gone into good strategy turn-based mechanics that this game ignores. And you kind of have to give it a free pass because it is like a very early PlayStation 1 game, and probably by a developer that is not one that did Fire Emblem or Landgresser or Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre. I can't say that for certain, but it seems like this developer has like only a little bit of experience in this genre because boy, do they screw up a few things. Like namely, when like enemies only seem to have 2 states of action. One is it won't move or do anything at all, and it's basically like kind of like you haven't triggered its aggro, which is probably a conditional flag determined based on like what obstacles or environmental hazards or whatever have been passed or gone over. If a drawbridge has not been dropped, enemies on the other side of that castle wall will not come at you. But then in the second state, which is the regular state, it always goes towards you at the maximum distance, which makes it very exploitable to, look at their distance box or distance path and just let them come to you first. And then you can always get your
draw
first
them
hit
individually. Yeah.
But what I found is that even in the earlier levels, there's no degree of pacing. So if you have a map with 7 people, those 7 people just all charge at you no matter what. And it doesn't give you it doesn't give me personally a satisfying experience because part of these games is about like closing the distance. Like you feel a sense of progress on the map because you were halfway across the map from where you started, right?
Especially in a game like Fire Emblem where sometimes the boss unit is sitting on a fortress or something that gives them added defense, added attack, and restoring health. Like
exactly,
it really feels like you are having to storm the castle or like they have a tactical advantage over you, and that is why you're having the fight in the first place.
And especially in this game where some of the objectives are like you have to get to this castle. But it seems like the better strategy is to just sit at
draw
your
every
corner
person
of
out
the
of the
map
castle
and let them all come to you. It just doesn't feel. It doesn't
That's not
feel good
realistic.
at all. On that same note, in terms of like poor design choices, assuming my controller was set up correctly, square was your accept button for everything, and circle was your cancel button. Which, and I that could have been me setting up the emulator wrong too. So let me throw that out there. The menu system for equipment and items is so bare bones. It's almost like they coded everything in conditional statements with like a regular dialogue box. There's barely any offer of showing you like comparison stats, and all of the text is still in univwidth or monowidth. So that means like what would have given you maybe like 10 spaces to describe any piece of equipment in Japanese, which is probably more than enough with, with hiragana and kanji and so forth. You only have like 9 spaces for any piece of equipment. So all of your swords just end up being letter sword, different letter sword. S
like
sword.
L sword? Oh, S sword. Okay.
S sword and L sword, and that's short sword, long sword. And just a bunch of things that like don't feel great. On the flip side, the main character literally looks like they took Nicolas Cage and were like, let's make him anime.
Isn't that a plus?
Yeah. On the flip side, that's actually pretty good. And the second main character kind of looks like Steven Seagal before he gained the extra weight.
Oh, no, that's less. I prefer fat Steven Seagal for sure.
In any case,
where he no longer has to move very far or fast to snap someone's neck. They just walk up to him so he can do it.
He also turns into a heavy knight now that I think about it. Anyways, though, it's been kind of delightful going back to these games that I hardly remember, but still somehow remember all of the weird iconic things, like the ridiculous amounts of blood that spill out when you kill enemies, and the ridiculous idle animations of these sprites too. Nice trip down memory lane. Vanguard Bandits, on the other side, is like weird mecha-based combat with Fire Emblem and Super Robot Wars inspirations. But like the thing that I apparently had forgotten so much was that this game is literally a walking anime trope. Like straight down to all of the cast members being people that you could just call from other animes. Like, this is the Yamcha character. Here's the Krillin character.
You just keep naming people who die a lot. Are you bad at strategy?
Well, the interesting thing with Vanguard Bandits, and I'll keep this short because maybe I've talked about this before, but whether or not you get the good ending in that game is determined based on what your like friendships with your entire party is. If anyone has like a low friendship rating with your main character, you get the bad ending. It's crazy. But if anyone dies in a battle, that lowers their friendship rating with the main character dramatically. So you actually like, it's been a long while since I've played this game and beat it. But if I'm not mistaken, you basically can't let anyone die in combat. I mean, it's not permadeath, but it basically is, because that's going to lower their friendship with their friendship rating enough that you may not be able to
way
recover
less
it.
useful.
Right. But yeah, that's all I've played. That's all I can really comment on.
I'm watching the intro right now for Vanguard Bandits.
Dude, it's
opening.
so 90s anime. It's like you're watching Voltron. Like, the creators of Voltron could not keep writing anime, so they wrote video games.
Yep, and there they are. I mean, it is pretty much the same thing. All the way up to, I think the bad guy has a face on their chest.
Yeah, and the main character has a cross on his helmet.
On his head, yeah. Yep. Interesting. Vanguard Bandits. I don't think I'll play it.
I wouldn't recommend it. Like, I can't tell if I love it unironically or ironically yet.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, since we are on the topic of like hulking bodies in armor, I think we might as well just roll into talking at least a little bit about my play of God of War, the 2018, or I guess 2018. It's not a reboot even; it's a continuation. It's like it's a fourth quel, but it God of War 2018, right? Same way that Doom 2016 is not like Doom 1990 or whatever that is.
Right. Although even Doom is also a sequel as well.
Yes, it is. Yeah. But they're just using the same name because, some of us have died since playing the original. Some of us weren't born when the original was released or were infants at the time. Like, there's a big enough gap that there's, I think, not that much ambiguity between which Doom you're talking about if you take like 3 seconds to mention the glory kill system. And same with God of War. If you say Leviathan Axe, it's pretty obvious you're not talking about the PlayStation 2 like slash 'em up with Kratos and his chain blades. Which I won't at least for this discussion, because Cookie is also picking up God of War, and it's still a relatively fresh game. Like, I'm not going to introduce any spoilers for the game or the story, at least on this conversation whatsoever. I'm going to definitely try and skew as far away from that as possible and talk mostly about how this game has just been a really, really satisfying, like, third-person kind of, I guess, I'd even say like pretty like fluid and tactical combat game. I think it's fair to say tactical for this just because they throw so many enemy types at you in this game that have absolutely like hardwired optimal strategies or weaknesses that you need to exploit if you're playing on any level. If you're playing on any difficulty, I think, past the story. Just because not doing so makes them like last on the battlefield much longer than they need to, and battlefield clutter in this game, meaning lots of enemies and hordes and swarms, like very difficult to manage in the long term. A short amount of time of weak enemies swarming you is not a big deal, but this game, I think, pretty rapidly starts to ramp up how many like shielded enemies or large like ogres it throws your way, or even near boss like characters, in the same way that in the original Dark Souls, fighting the Capra demon is a boss fight, and then later you can end up fighting 2 or 3 Capra demons at once, or the Taurus demon becomes like just a regular enemy and is no longer a boss fight. There are enemy types that exist that are a replica of a boss fight of one sort or another that start to crop up as you progress further in the game. And so the swarms really work to like reduce your movement and just get cheap shots in when you're fighting a much harder enemy. And by not utilizing all of the different like tricks and variability of Kratos's like toolkit for fighting, can just become like overwhelming. And I've actually really, really enjoyed that about this game. What makes it, I think, different from I remember the lauded Dark Souls-like combat that was suggested at the very beginning of this game's release, is that if you have your HUD operating with all of the information on screen, there's really so much more that you know in the fight than you would ever know in a Dark Souls-esque combat game, in which, yes, the timing of your attacks and whatnot are going to be maybe a little more critical than the original God of War, where essentially just mashing your R1 button to throw chains around the whole time is more or less a completely viable strategy, because you can interrupt and roll out of the way of any big attack that swings your way. The amount of like information being provided to you when you have a special attack lined up for a light special runic attack or a heavy special runic attack is available. You have the ability to target and interrupt with like an extremely competent and like really useful AI companion that is your son Atreus in combat. And as you progress forward, you know, being able to release even his like runic special abilities and whatnot make the game, I think, deviate pretty far from the like Dark Souls comparison that it was given. But by just fiddling with my HUD a little bit, I took out a lot of the info that was provided on the screen to try and get us as immersive of an experience as possible. I don't know how you played, Neil, but what I have on my screen is my compass. That is the only info I have. I don't know. I don't have how many arrows Atreus has left, or even if he's using one type of arrows or another. I don't know when my runic attacks have recharged, though I think there might be a visual cue with the gems on the axe. Combat is way too hectic for you to really be able to tell in the moment, especially if you're fighting enemies that have like ice or lava. Like those particle effects really start to like blind you a little bit when you're looking for those small details. But I don't even know my health bar. I don't even know my rage bar, like what's in there. But the game does such a good job at communicating. Oh, I guess the other thing is when you turn that off, I also have turned off any sort of enemy indicators. I have no indicators telling me where enemies are at or when they're about to fire, which I know God of War does to help you kind of manage the fact that you can see a lot less with your camera in this game than any other God of War, which was a lot more zoomed out. I can't see folks who are sniping on me, so I have to be extra vigilant about hearing attacks coming at me, or because I give the compliment to Atreus being an incredibly competent like AI companion. Atreus and later another companion who can kind of watch my back, so to speak, are able to give me like heads up and warnings when an attack is incoming, and they'll even sometimes tell me the direction from where I'm facing. So I'll get right behind you, or like on your right, or what is it, like icicle incoming. They'll yell things at me that are extremely like small quips of information, but with really high like accuracy and info for me to make an immediate response on my controller as a player, and respond in a way that I think is like incredibly immersive and like very satisfying to react to, as opposed to having a colored arrow like flash a different color right before I'm about to take an attack from behind. Like hearing about it and also being forced to manage combat by keeping an eye on everyone around me has made this game really, really satisfying combat-wise. Now, did you happen to play with all of the basic HUD elements activated?
Yeah.
And did you enjoy the combat quite a bit? Because I know you like the game.
Yeah, and a lot of it I experienced with Tiff playing too. So what I played of the game, I think it feels good, but it feels more like Resident Evil 4 than it does. Like I'm trying to think of a good equivalence to a more recent game. Like it feels more like Resident Evil 2/4 and less Bloodborne.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the elements of the combat to me feel like they are trying to go down a less character action driven game and a more Souls game. And I guess what I mean by that is that you can't always just keep whacking things without consequence, which is something that you generally can do in character action games. And by that, I mean, older God of Wars, Nier Automata, Devil May Cry, right?
Right. Yeah. And the only time that you're not allowed to do that is when like a what is it? Like, what do they call it in Smash? A super armor attack comes at you, where essentially they resist the stagger on your impacts.
Right.
And it's a counter punch. You have to dodge it or block it. And sometimes you can't block it.
And so while I perceive that the gameplay is good, I wish it were still a little more brainless, if that makes sense.
Oh, so you actually felt
because I don't think the stricter, and again I say Souls like because it's a lot more about like responding, predicting, reading, especially as you go further into the game, you have to read things more than you have to read and react, I guess. Especially in I'm not going to talk about the specific encounters because I don't know necessarily how far you are, but it's a lot of reading and reacting, and I'm fine with that. But my problem is that I find it harder to read and react in God of War, mainly because Kratos eats up a third of your screen.
He's a big guy.
Whereas, like, I'm okay with that in Bloodborne and Dark Souls because while the tells are further away, I have the ability to see the tell from the corner of my screen or the corner of my eye, if you will. Whereas in this game, I have to be focused. I always have to be focused on that one point and one place. And the movement feels clunky enough at times and more like Resident Evil 2 or 4 at times that like I don't always feel like I can make the movement I want to make. Whereas in Bloodborne and Dark Souls, while you do have very specific limits to where you can roll or dash or dodge,
it's very precise in how you execute it.
It feels like it's much easier for me to grasp the movement system there compared to God of War. I constantly was asking myself when I played the game, because I didn't finish it myself. I basically let Tiff finish it, and that was my okay, I'm done with this. I can wash my hands of it. I always wondered if the camera view was just pulled back more, if I would have liked God of War as much or more than I did.
And it seems like the combat that you're comparing it to, I don't know if I've ever seen this coined anywhere, so I'm not doing anything groundbreaking, I know, but it's based on enemy weakness and less on character strength, I think is maybe the argument of a lot of Resident Evil games, this game in particular. It's like having overwhelming strength or power in any category is less useful to you than exploiting the weakness of a character.
Yeah.
Yeah, being able to empty, in Resident Evil's example, being able to empty a ton of rounds into something with a strong weapon is less useful than kneecapping it and suplexing it with, say 2 bullets. Yeah.
Right.
My favorite approach for every single enemy in Resident Evil is if they're suplexable, they're getting suplexed. And in God of War, absolutely the same idea goes. Like an enemy with a shield, you can use a really powerful attack to knock their shield out of the way, or you can just do the one of two strategies for like eliminating the shield and turning them into at least a weak pawn. And that is bashing them with your own shield to open up their defense. Or actually, I guess there's 3 strategies: countering their attack, which opens them up, or the last one is sweeping their legs with the Leviathan axe, which the addition of range in the game with the Leviathan axe for that combat, and Atreus' arrows to some smaller degree, and another ability, I will say, that occurs later on that has a little more limited reach, but still has range, like heavy and light range attacks to it. Like all of those implemented are really, really satisfying in this game, and I think also prop up the enjoyment level of the combat for me. That if they did not exist, if those functionalities of the Leviathan axe being thrown and its recall and all of its, I guess, bonus abilities that you can unlock on how many times it can hit, or like the impacts after certain criteria are met, it might make the combat a lot more dull. But that implementation of range and how fluid you can be switching between the axe and your fists, or say something else, really also make the combat, I think, super fresh, even when it comes to exploiting weaknesses.
Yeah, like I said, like I don't. It's one of those cases where I feel it's my own weird preference that's getting in the way with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's also hard for me to sometimes know, and maybe this is what kind of describes how I play games like Sekiro and Bloodborne. To a lesser degree, Sekiro.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're in closer, it feels harder for me to determine when an attack is necessarily going to hit you.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would rather dodge than block.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it feels more satisfying to me. Blocking feels, and maybe this is because I used to play old fighter games.
I think we've played too much Bloodborne. Blocking just feels like sometimes not an option.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that. It's maybe something ingrained for me from playing all of these different kinds of games, like old fighters with chip damage, platformers where blocking was never an option, Bloodborne where blocking is not an option and
it's
frowned
laughed
upon.
at, actually.
And Sekiro, even blocking feels kind of like a cop out. You should be deflecting, right?
Yeah,
Like,
blocking.
that is,
I say for Sekiro that blocking is a failure to deflect.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sometimes going to have to use it constantly just because I'd rather be a coward than a dead hero.
Yeah.
Yeah. But blocking, I'd much rather dodge, roll out of the way, skip out of the way, backstep. So that's totally like a personal preference thing. And I obviously will admit to knowing that God of War is a much better game than I give it credit for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worth far more than I personally value it at.
Well, and what's funny is I remember you praising it nonetheless when we talked about it.
Because there's great stuff that happens in that game.
Yeah. Story-wise, there are no spoilers whatsoever incoming, but I just want to say I'm very satisfied with the story so far. And the progression that exists between your relationship as Kratos with Atreus, and also Kratos' relationship, or like coming to terms with his own self. We have to talk about it at some point in time in another podcast, because I think that there is something just absolutely brilliant about what they've done with the story. And that brilliance is so cool. And I mean, I think it's so smart and impressive, because it's able to develop both a narrative in the game and literally like a meta narrative for the game outside of itself, like within the context of God of War, but a game that has a story that also addresses its previous iterations, when it's also like, you could say this God of War is like sort of a reboot. It is a reboot that does not whitewash everything that comes before it, though. It's not a Disney reboot where they say none of this is canon anymore. It's instead a reboot where there's a reckoning with everything that came beforehand. And I am absolutely fascinated by that.
Well, I mean, the game is such a transformation for the series. And that's to say, straight down to the gameplay, obviously, but also Kratos' character. I mean, a lot of time has passed since the last God of War game came out, preceding to God of War 2018.
And I'd say also in the game, a lot of time has passed too.
Yes, absolutely. And like it should definitely say something that, like, I'm not a huge fan of the gameplay, but yet I like everything else about the game to a pretty good degree, so much that I still value it a lot.
Yeah, if you still have nice things to say about a game that you didn't have that much fun playing, like I think that's amazing. I almost
I
never
don't.
have anything nice to say about a game that I didn't actually have fun playing.
I also don't think that it's an issue if we kind of touch on a couple spoilers here and there. I won't get ahead of you, so to speak, obviously, because I want
Right.
you to experience that for yourself.
And you don't know where
Um,
I'm at, but I can say at least that early stuff, I'm quite into the game at this point, for sure.
So have you had to go inside of a pillar of light? I'm being as obscure as possible.
A
And
pillar
then-
of light, you say?
A pillar of light. You go into a pillar of light.
I
And then-
am massively further than that.
Okay. I mean that's just like an example of really solid storytelling,
Mhm.
offering you very very little in the script, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like
almost
the game
no
relies
dialogue.
on so much more to actually tell you all like what has happened.
Mhm.
And again, warnings for spoilers. I doubt Cookie's going to listen to this, so we don't have to worry about that. And it has been a year, so I think we can address what would be like. What, 1/3 of the way through the game, if that.
If even that, it's such an odyssey.
Yeah, I guess what I could say is that if you're beelining it, it's maybe 1/3 of the way through. But there's
Okay.
so much side content to it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're inside of that, oh god, I don't even remember what you would call it, like a temporal pause, or it's like some sort of link.
Mm-hmm.
Atreus eventually pulls you out from there,
Mm-hmm.
and whether or not it's clear, like I was playing it with Tiff at the time, and she pointed it out to me. But like, while you're inside of that, which feels like seconds, literally is
In
seconds
the
to you,
gameplay,
the player.
it's 15, 20 seconds.
It's alluded to that so much time has passed, and when you're out, you see Atreus and a whole bunch of fresh corpses that were not there before.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Stacked, neatly arranged.
what it does is it gives you growth, not only for the character, but it implies upon like uncertainty over the amount of time that has passed, and a degree of like mystery behind like what is going on with your little boy there as well. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
again, not trying not to get too into like the later game story. The ability for the game to so like to utilize Norse mythology in such an interesting way.
I haven't seen done before ever.
Yeah, I mean, straight down. Like the funniest part to me is that like Baldur is absolutely not what he is in the game as he's depicted in mythology. He's kind of seen as like the golden boy.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like let's say in the universe where God of War exists, these mythological beings are not always what they are according to the mythos that they're based on.
Right, the nobility of Thor.
Dude, Baldur is basically a drunk ass, like,
He's a piece of shit.
yeah.
Yeah, he's like a scummy, scrawny, tatted up biker that you're gonna find in any like dive bar off of a highway. Like that's a good, I think, distillation of his character. And Thor, for instance, someone that you never meet because I do believe he is deceased in the lore of this game. Before you start, Thor's a son of a bitch. Like he's also just a really like bad dude, and so you hear all of Thor's exploits, and you always get to hear with the lore and the dialogue, which the way that they introduce this, we can talk about maybe on another episode. But when you're hearing about the like mythos of Thor, his actions are still like fantastical. They're still, like godlike and immense. But the reason why he does them, and normally like the outcomes and how he behaves during them that you learn, just make him seem like he's such a bumbling piece of shit as well. Like all of these Norse gods suck. and yet they're very like interesting and entertaining in the way that they do. And the minor characters that exist in the world are very, very interesting and fun. And like there aren't many, but I think for the most part, you're really just kind of like rooting for everyone who exists in this pantheon who is not a god. And it also helps that Kratos is, I think, repeatedly shit talking like gods are bad. Gods are bad. Like, hey everyone, I hate to say it, gods are bad. Like, maybe killing gods isn't so bad. Or at least not trusting them is absolutely like necessary to survival.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like the Greek tragedy in terms of Greek theater has been applied to this universe by so much, and that's how you should address every situation. Like, is there a possibility for Greek tragedy to unfold here? Yes. All right.
It's
that means
there,
we
yeah.
avoid. I'll be curious to talk to you more on this once you finish the game, because there's like that again. The plot is what I find to be so fun.
I think there are ways for them to fumble this ending, but I'm very hopeful because I just haven't seen any points of weakness yet in the storytelling. And the pacing is excellent too. Every moment I get used to being a dad on a quest to throw ashes off of a mountaintop, I get thrown a curveball in one way or another that causes me to like question myself and question my boy, and question the entire journey itself, and I like that a lot.
Damn, all you have to do is just get up and fucking spread some ashes.
I do love that the quest for this game is actually super simple, and it's just like hitting roadblock after roadblock in a way that makes complete sense. Like, part of it comes absolutely from Kratos' ignorance and the isolation of Atreus, his son. But also part of it is just like, well, of course all of this shit is like of course we're having to deal with all of this. Like we're in an unfamiliar place with unfamiliar goals, and danger and hardship lurks around every corner in a believable way. Especially considering that all of your companions are skeletons. Like there are bodies littered around this world. It's really it explains why it's so empty, but it also makes me wonder, like, what the hell was Kratos, his wife, who we have no idea what her name is, at least at where I'm at, and Atreus, like, how did they live so isolated for that long, like completely unaware of what was going on outside of them? They did not live in a very large area either. Even within the game world, you can see the area that's been essentially like sanctioned or cordoned off for their safety, and it's really small. It's like really, really small. Atreus could essentially leave it with a couple hours walking in any direction is kind of what it suggests. So they've lived in a bubble, which is weird.
In large part, I don't think this is much of a spoiler for the early portion of the game. If you're Kratos and you have just murdered the entirety of Greek mythology, save, a few names here and there, what are
you afraid of?
Well, I mean, he, like, the context, at least I felt, was that he's done with it, right? He doesn't want to keep doing that. He wants to raise his son. He wants to get a wife,
I don't
raise
like
his son.
doing that anymore.
So like, yeah, they absolutely have to hold themselves up someplace so they don't get bothered by, any other major names from mythology.
That's fair.
Maybe it's not that they would necessarily be a problem with these Norse gods, we'll say, but like that doesn't mean that
the Greek gods wouldn't try and reach out to them, right?
Right. They're not necessarily clear of those past bridges. They aren't entirely burned yet. He did a good job of burning most of them.
Yeah.
Or
beheading or eye gouging or
I like how his journey can kind of be a glamorization of a man having to take his son to the shopping mall for the first time ever. It's like, well, your mom's got to work overtime tonight, so I guess we're going to go get groceries.
I just think about like what I find also really interesting too in the presentation that like could be elucidated on a further episode is the violence in this game. One is, I guess, it's toned down from the previous God of War. It's not that it isn't really visceral. There are moments in which like you hook an ogre with your axe and slice through its mouth. But like the number of just obscene, the number of incidents in which obscene violence happens to a human or or humanoid, I should say, because there are lots of humanoid monsters, but something that is considered like sentient and not inherently evil, the amount of violence committed to them is very small, and that is a huge like deviation from God of War as well.
I'm trying to think of human encounters in general. I think you run into some cannibals really early on.
That's it, though. Yeah. And they get like they're going to eat you, and then they turn into hell walkers, I believe. And that's the last time you really commit abusive violence to humans.
There is absolutely a degree of mood shift from the other games, and it's very intentionally displayed in the scene where Atreus is tasked with killing the deer. The deer?
Mm-hmm.
The deer.
Yeah, a deer and a boar too. There's another one with a boar.
Oh, right. Although that doesn't go.
That's a little different, but
yeah.
Once again, like the consequences of violence in any degree are really like there's a spotlight on that,
which I value. Like
I do like that.
Again, like we talked about it. Was it last week or a week before or so? I don't necessarily think violence in video games is bad, but I think there's a degree of maturity when the writers or whoever depict like a consequence of violence.
A game that is never willing to address its violence, I think, is I don't know. I think it's overlooking something. There are lots of games with varying degrees of just like absolute brutality and gore, and I just happen to notice that the ones that I enjoy the most almost always have some sort of acknowledgement or reckoning with it at some point in time. Another game I'm playing right now that kind of does that I'll talk about on the next podcast is Katana Zero. That's an extremely like lots of blood splatter on that game. And
I'm glad we haven't gotten there because that's a game I was thinking about picking up.
I really think you should. I've been incredibly satisfied by it so far. Super, super tight gameplay, which is nice.
That's actually kind of what I want. I liked the fact that you addressed that because the reason why I didn't play Katana Zero was because I was worried that it was going to go Metal Slug on me.
Which I've never been good enough at Metal Slug to get past the first levels. So,
well, it's just that like Metal Slug is. I say that because like they're both like short, cartoony characters, and Metal Slug is like it's not necessarily gory, but it's just about killing a shit ton of people. And the only justifying thing about Metal Slug, I think, is that you might be fighting some evil regime.
They look sort of like Nazis.
Basically, and you're saving POWs in the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I was watching some people stream this game, it certainly didn't seem like there was much outside of just being a cool kill everyone assassin. And it was just about the same time I was finishing up Sekiro, and the best part about Sekiro's story, in my opinion, is that the more you think about it, the more you are absolutely a very villain-like character in that story, regardless of what ending you go for, whether it's the beast or not.
True.
Like the territory that you are running around in and so forth, that you're viewed as an enemy, and like you were killing all of this. Oh God, was it
Ashina?
Yeah, Ashina. But like, what was the daimyo's name, or was it even the daimyo? I don't know what I don't even know like what position he was, if he was just the head of that clan or what, but like you were absolutely killing a bunch of people that you could basically deem as innocent.
I think it's Ishin's men, right?
Yes, it's Ishin, but like was he like a quote unquote duke or lord? Like did he have
I believe he's a lord.
Okay.
Yeah.
But everyone in that castle, they are purely trying to protect their homeland and protect their lord, liege, or liege lord,
Right.
rather.
And in Sekiro, your slaughter of them also renders them weak to a government invasion.
Yes, exactly. And you technically don't have to kill that many people in that game. You can just run right through them.
Yeah. Yep.
And there are some named people that you have to kill in order to get keys and so forth, but the choice of killing is entirely a choice. Whereas in Katana Zero, it seems like you absolutely have to mow through everyone.
Sometimes.
Well, yeah, sometimes. But like if there's a hallway where you have to get to the end of the hallway, you're going to kill those people.
Yes, and it actually operates on a lock system in which if not every enemy is dead, you cannot exit. And there's an explanation for the times when that's the case, but that is most of the times as well.
Okay.
There are opportunities to avoid killing, and there is even a portion in which I think the choice to kill or not to kill at all is given. But besides that, more often than not, a door to your combat puzzle is locked until you've killed everything.
Gotcha. I mean, the fact that consequences addressed already makes it stand out more to me now. So
it's
I'm
not
pick that up.
Hotline Miami, in which you do a bunch of killing and then at the end of the game, it's like, hey, you did a bunch of senseless killing. How do you feel about that? And the game just kind of like leaves you with it. This one, I think, juggles that a lot more responsibly and is like repeatedly addressing the violence in the situation that you're in. And there are motivators as to why you would find yourself doing, I guess, playing through the game in the first place.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. I think that's it for now.
Yeah, I think so too. If you have comments or questions, you can write into podcast@fancyramen.com.
We stream on Twitch. You can find us at www.twitch.tv/FancyRamenTV. Also, you can see Cookie at /CookieSkimilk, CUKISKMILK. And our buddy John plays at JFray all day. That's JAYFRAY all DAY. I don't know why that's so satisfying to say, but it is. Kudos to John for such a good name on Twitch. Also, please tell family and friends about our podcast. It's the holidays, and this is normally when we start to produce our best content of the year, in my opinion. Now is a better time than ever to pick up and start listening to the Fancy Ramen podcast.